usual, thumbs up. We've got it. Beautiful. We're online. We're going. Morning, everybody. Welcome to my final cabinet meeting. I will accommodate a brief recess for tears if anybody needs them. We're all good. In the world's biggest leadership news this week. We will try and dive through the agenda this morning. Quite a lengthy one, so we will be as succinct as we ever are when it comes to these decisions. We'll jump straight into it. So minutes of the previous meeting. Anybody got any issues to raise? All comfortable with those minutes? Yep, great. Any apologies, Mr. Business Manager?
No apologies, Leader.
We're all here. Any declarations of interest? Derek?
Thank you, Leader. I should declare an interest as I'm a member of the Board of Directors for the East Midlands DevCo.
Thank you. And we'll mention, although it's not a declarable interest because it's something we do in our role as county councillors, but Councillor Clark and I also sit on the oversight body for the DevCo. Not convinced it's going to meet again, subject to decisions today, but worth probably putting in the public domain anyway. Anybody else? Happy enough. Okay, great. We'll move straight on to the first substantive item then, number 4, which is the Healthy Families Programme. Scott.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and good morning, everybody. The government's Healthy Child programme, which the Council has a statutory responsibility to provide, is the national evidence-based universal programme for children aged 0 to 19. Locally, this is delivered as the Nottinghamshire Healthy Families Programme, HFP. The current contract is due to end on the 30th of September 2025, following a key decision to extend the contract taken by myself as a Cabinet member on the 8th of May of this year. This extension enabled the Council time to consider the Care Quality Commission and any other regulatory bodies' actions and recommendations relating to the current provider of the service, Nottinghamshire Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust, and to consider the best way of delivering the Nottinghamshire HFP in the future. That are available to the Council. The appraisal reviews the options of service delivery, i.e. how the service is delivered, rather than the options for the model of the service, i.e. what is delivered. The service model for the Nottinghamshire HFP will reflect the model that underwent public consultation and also consultation with elected members via Overview Committee. On the 9th of September 2024, I presented a summary of these options for the long-term delivery of this service to Adult Social Care and Public Health Select Committee, as well as members of Children and Families Select Committee. The comments, the supportive comments and considerations of members on the options appraisal that has been undertaken were welcomed, and I'm grateful for not just the challenge, but also for their continued support. It's acknowledged that all options come with strengths and weaknesses, I'll be absolutely clear. Following the comprehensive appraisal of options, it is recommended that the Council undertakes a competitive tender process for a single integrated service. This will provide assurance that the market has been fully assessed via a well-recognised and transparent process and enable an objective assessment of potential providers' ability to deliver a service that is integrated in with both the wider Council's early help system and the relevant NHS services. The service specification will ensure that the service considers exploration of new models of shared service ownership, governance or partnership, enables integration, as I say, with current NCC services as well as local health services, including as a core delivery partner of the Family Hubs network. This also allows flexibility to respond to change and continue to transform to ensure that we meet the needs of Nottinghamshire's families. The service specification will also continue to include enhanced contractual measures and mechanisms to provide an ongoing performance and quality assurance. And following a successful procurement process, a contract of 3 + 2 years would be awarded, bringing the total maximum contract length to 5 years. Leader, with your permission, just before I conclude, this has clearly been a lengthy and fulsome exercise, and I would just like to place on public records not just my thanks to the interim DPH Viv Robbins, but the wider public health team involved in this, Louise Lester, Helena Cribbs, Kerry Adams and Catherine McVicker. Leader, to conclude, The report recommends that the Cabinet approves the carrying out of a competitive tender process and subsequent award for contractor delivery of the Nottinghamshire HFP for a period of up to 5 years. On that point, I will pause, and before I conclude, I will formally move the recommendations of this report on page 12. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Really helpful. And echo those comments about thanks to the team involved in putting this together. It was obviously a complex web of services and a challenging environment out there to procure and deliver them. So, really important piece of work. I think the numbers in terms of the value of the contract speak to just the importance of this in terms of that public health and prevention work that we want to deliver as a council. So hugely important that we get this right. I don't think anybody in the true spirit of public health could accuse us of not delivering enough information here in the report for us to get our teeth into. So hopefully everybody has everything they need in terms of considering this decision. Is there anyone else who wants to speak or ask questions of Scott? Tracy?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Scott. Obviously, the commissioning of this sits squarely with Scott in his public health brief, but the most significant delivery is clearly for children and family services, so my portfolio area, especially in context of the effectiveness and the outcomes for children and families. So what we get out of what you're commissioning for us. The paper's very clear in showing the amount of joint working that's gone on, both to reshape the contract that is running through and to prepare ahead of commissioning a new full contract. It also shows wide consultation, including with stakeholders and families. I have been kept updated and involved, as have my officers throughout. So I also just wanted to add my thanks to the officer corps, to Scott and his team for the work that has gone into this and for shaping what I think is already a considerably better service than we've offered hitherto, and will determine the service that comes for future generations. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Really helpful. Anybody else on this one? Anything further you'd like to add, Scott?
I was going to say, whilst we're looking to the future, a couple of weeks ago, I had a good fortune along with the DPH and officers to visit the current provider, to see the service actually in the flesh, to understand that the key, as Tracy was just making, those sort of key links, not just to the families out there, also to our own services, and equally with permission sought by the families, actually to go and talk to them directly. Number of families that have just had young infants to get their understanding, and actually also in the current context, as I described in the introductory notes, we understand that the wider challenges around the current provider and other forums. Actually, it was really, really pleasing to hear of how highly thought of this is within Nottinghamshire and the value that's adding. Certainly the eye is to the future, as we've described, and I will be encouraging colleagues to support this.
Thanks, Scott. Absolutely hugely important services. I think when you go and see them in that way and hear that feedback, I think certainly the impact of us not having them or not getting them right will be something that was felt very acutely by the council and our communities in a whole range of ways. So really important we do get this right. I think opportunities for us through this tender process to understand the market, as you say, and what's out there and what those opportunities are for us to develop and improve it. Clearly threaded throughout our long-term plans are a lot of proposals to get deeper into communities, into that early help and intervention space in a more comprehensive way, as comprehensive as we can. So hugely important that we do knit all of this together with our wider range of services, as Councillor Taylor has said. If there's nobody else on this, Bruce, yes?
Yeah, just a quick one really. I'd like to pass my thanks on to you particularly, Viv. The way that you have bought into our aims and objectives, particularly as far as the Nottinghamshire plan is concerned, is really impressive. And if you can pass that on to your team as well, because it is absolutely essential as far as early intervention is concerned, which is one of our, not mantras, which is what we're trying to achieve, is based on the support from your area of influence. So thank you very much from the leadership team.
Absolutely echo that. If there's nobody else, then we will go to the vote. Recommendations, as Scott says, on page 12. All those in favour? It's unanimous, thank you. And we'll move on to item 5, the East Midlands Development Corporation. Keith.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. This report seeks the approval of the Cabinet for the winding up of East Midlands Development Company and for senior officers to take the necessary steps to facilitate this. As such, the report marks a landmark moment for us. Along with other councils, we set up the DevCo several years ago as an interim vehicle to kickstart East Midlands programme of inward investment and strategic site development to promote green growth, create high skills jobs and generate opportunities for local people. The time is now right with the advent of the combined authority and its pivotal role in generating growth and prosperity for our region. For the DevCo and its work to transition into wider regional settings. But at that point of transition, it is worth noting the successes of DevCo, and the report highlights its great work that it's carried out. So, for example, to develop a clear integrated vision for key strategic sites in Nottinghamshire and combining housing, jobs and transport connectivity. Developing a post-HS2 strategy for our own region's key railway stations. Generated a compelling ambition for the Steppe region in the north of Notts and leveraging a multi-million pound investment from government and local partners to enable that work, which will create a legacy of strategic insight for the combined authority to convert into long-term infrastructure to drive growth. So I'm pleased to recommend to Cabinet that the report be approved and the achievements of the DevCo team be noted and celebrated. Our focus can now turn to ensure that our combined authority delivers the blueprint for the growth that the DevCo have generated. Recommendations are laid out on page 112, Leader.
Thanks, Keith. Really helpful. And obviously the clue is in the name of the interim vehicle for development of these proposals. What the DevCo has delivered, as you say, is a huge amount of data and information and planning and scope for us to now take that forward through a new structure. But it's really important, as we've discussed at length around the combined authority, that now that we have that kind of unifying place and space for economic development and planning this kind of stuff on a strategic level, that we're not duplicating that and doing our own thing in other vehicles and other places around the region, but we bring all of that together in one place for some shared decision making. So it'll be up to the combined authority as to how they develop that in the future and whether they want to have a mayoral development corporation or others to carry on that mantle or run it differently. But in the short term, it's important that we pass that resource and that roll over to the combined authority to be able to do that. Is there anyone else who wants to speak to this?
Go on. Okay, I'll just come back on that, Leader. I think what it's done, it's shown a blueprint for EMCA to follow, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's the important thing, which means then that their objectives will be achieved a lot quicker than they would have done if they're just starting from scratch. So I think there's that benefit to it all as well.
I think that's absolutely right. And for us, from a council perspective, outside of the wider regional picture, for us to be able to go into those conversations with a detailed set of plans and asks and opportunities that we can not just describe but actually evidence when it comes to making those wider regional economic plans and a local growth plan that we've now got to deliver, actually having that work around places like Ratcliffe-on-Soar and Steppe and major projects will put us in a really good position to be able to deliver those more quickly and more effectively. Although I am grateful that there are yet to be probably going to be fewer meetings in the future. Anybody else wish to speak to this? Otherwise, move on to vote on the recommendations that Keith put forward. All those in favour? Thank you very much. It is back to you, Keith, I'm afraid. Linby Meadows residential development.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I think it's important to note that before I go into the report that this actually comes below the threshold that we did have to actually bring it to Cabinet. But we felt in the interest of transparency, it was best to make it public that we've been given an additional cost to that particular development. As I say, we could have just sort of paid it and tried to keep it quiet, but that's not how we operate as a leading group. So I'm really pleased that it's been brought to Cabinet. So I'll just do a potted history, if you like, of what's happened. So what we came into a deal with Vistry in terms of the land at Top Wigay Farm And part of that deal is, and it's a standard practice, that we have to make sure that the facilities, the utilities, are suitable for that site. One of them being water. Obviously, we've got then electricity, sewage, all of it. So we did our due diligence right at the beginning and asked all those utilities what would be required to be able to put an additional 800 houses in that area, and they all came back with answers. And therefore, we proceeded on that knowledge, and that's how we then went on to the deal with Vistry. Late to the table, a utility company's come back to us and said, well, actually, we need more supply there, and it's resulted in a bill just short of £1 million. Now, the way I look at that, if they'd have said that right at the beginning, this deal would still have gone ahead. Because when you think about the fact that we're going to make in the region of £40 million from this deal, it's a good deal, even with that additional money that we're going to have to spend. So if they'd said it right at the beginning, we still would have done it anyway. So all this really is doing is rubber stamping the expense of having it happen. It's about 1.5 kilometres of pipe that's got to be put in for that site. And I ask members to support the request for that additional funding.
Thanks, Keith. Grateful for that. Anybody else want to speak to this item, Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Obviously, this development is within my division, so I speak as a divisional member as well as member of this cabinet. This is a massively significant development site. We're not just building a housing estate here on the edge of Hucknall. We're building effectively a self-contained village, which will have massive facilities for residents, 800 homes, and of course it'll sit alongside our own new council HQ. So it's important we get it right. And the fact that Severn Trent are a little bit late to the table with telling us that they actually can't meet the requirements set out in the development agreement is unfortunate, but better that they're telling us now rather than that the thing had started and then all of a sudden we find that we don't have the requisite facilities in place to be able to make this site sustainable and successful in the future. We have to do it. It's not a case of having an option. We have to do it to be able to meet the agreement. We have to do it to be able to continue with the development and to meet our obligations to Vistry. So let's get on and make this site the success that it will be.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's worth just repeating the context that Keith put it in as well, in the sense of the income long term from the development of the wider site means that this is a slight reduction in income as opposed to a cost. And when you get into the context of, as I say, the wider development and the new Oak House development as well, actually all of those costs are covered within the envelope of this development as well. So it's really significant for us and important that we get it right. Keith, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to put it into context as well, and to make it absolutely clear, Oak House doesn't need this extra water supply. That water supply is covered. It's not to do anything to do with that. And also in part of the deal, so we're looking at about £40 million, and it's been branded more than that, but Conservative, so keep the cost. Just in front of where Oak House is going to be, and that's for employment land. So we've got some really good options with that. We could maybe generate some revenue from workshops, or we could sell the land for workshops or whatever. So that business plan is being worked up as we speak, and that'll be coming through cabinet as well. So it's a big deal. It's the biggest deal Nottinghamshire's ever done on any piece of land. So let's not let £1 million get in the way of that. Let's celebrate actually the benefit that's going to be to the people of Nottinghamshire.
Absolutely. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I find it quite frustrating, really, watching some of the criticism that has gone over this particular issue. Anybody that's been involved in business and is involved in business deal well knows that they always have a contingency plan of plus or minus 10% when they're doing a deal. It is a standard practice as far as any land sale or agency event is concerned. And that this 1 million falls well within that 10%. It could have been 4 million, and it would still been within that curtilage. So I find it quite really frustrating that we are providing a large capital receipt to help the people of Nottinghamshire, and all that certain individuals can do is carp about a particular event which has occurred on this particular site on the back of political reasons for trying to make a point. So well done, Keith, and thank the team for us, because I'm sure that £40 million will come in very useful in the near future.
Thanks, Lee. They're just following those comments, and I think it's just worth highlighting and repeating what Councillor Girling said. One of his comments: had we known this at the start of the deal, it would still have been done. So therefore, it's not as though somebody's changing anything. It would still be going ahead if this information was known then.
Anybody else want to raise anything on this? Otherwise, refer you to recommendations on page 117 of the report. 120? 120? You looking at the same report as me? 117, Keith. Yeah, that's why I'm in charge. Right, all those in favour of those recommendations? Thank you. That's unanimous. We'll move on to scrutiny review of residents' parking, Neil.
Thank you, Leader. Now it's page 120, because that's my recommendation.
Yeah, sorry,
Neil. Yes, get off my turf. Yeah. Right, sorry. Serious point, Leader. Residents' parking schemes has been to scrutiny, and I'm very grateful for this because the scrutiny process is very important. I view especially the policy development part of scrutiny as very important, and I like them being a critical friend, not criticism as such, but making constructive comments, and that is what this is all about. And the actual report from the scrutiny group is attached. I'm grateful to Councillor Adams for leading this. The 8 recommendations from the scrutiny group are there, and basically it is around the updating of the policy, the updating of the website, and expanding on the information that's given, and then updating the way that the state of progress of any parking scheme is actually made on the website. So there's lots of references to the website, but I'm, as I say, very grateful that the scrutiny group have contributed to this. Happy to accept those recommendations from the scrutiny group, which is outlined in the recommendation on page 120, which those 2 recommendations where we are proposing to accept those scrutiny recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. And yeah, another example of hopefully constructive work of scrutiny committees in the sense of helping us to develop policy in this space. We all want these services to be as effective as they can be for residents. And I hope from a wider public and transparency perspective, it comes across that when we get these recommendations through to Cabinet from our scrutiny committees and functions and members, we consider them and once again we accept them largely, and we're able to implement and improve services in that way. So it's a good cross-party and piece of engagement and work, I think, from that perspective. Sam, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Leader. I think I remember asking for this review at full council after following a rolling out of a scheme in my division, which took quite a long time. So just want to echo the Cabinet Member for Transport's view. Thanks to the committee for taking time to review the process, and also welcome the shortening of the timeline processes, which are highlighted on page 138 and 139, which is going to bring it down from, I think, reduce the timelines to 21 days, I think, which is helpful, and get through the recommendations to Cabinet quicker for the rollout if they're recommended after officers' review. So really welcome that. We all know in every division across the council the benefits parking schemes can bring to residential streets, particularly in Newark or Rushcliffe, where lots of terraced housing with no off-street parking. So the quicker we can get them in where they're wanted, the better. And I think the scrutiny review has helped us do that, so really helpful, and a thank you to them.
I'll turn my microphone on. We'll move then to recommendations, which are this time on page 120. All those in favour of those? Yes, I am digging at you, Keith. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. We'll move on then to, we're going to take items 8 and 9 together. We very often have these reports together on the agenda, and largely feeds into the same discussion, so I intend to have it once rather than twice, but I'll ask Councillor Jackson to introduce those reports.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Happy to introduce both reports, move the recommendations for each, and I don't know what page they're on. I'm sure someone will tell me in a minute. But start off with some good news on the financial monitor report. Colleagues have had this report for a week. During that time, we've actually not quite published, but drafted the Period 6 monitor report, which shows an improving position on the Period 5 monitor report. I thank colleagues and officers, because that's down to management interventions over the last several months. Now, we publish these monthly monitoring reports, unlike a lot of councils which publish them quarterly, which is all that you're required to do. Monthly reports are good practice. It shows problems before they escalate and allows us to intervene to reduce problems before they get completely out of hand. And I'm confident that we'll get this down further in future years. And so the figure in the Period 6 monitor report is now a £2.1 million overspend. It was higher than that at this point 12 months ago. And you'll recall that by the end of the financial year, we brought in an underspend on the council's budget of about £7.5 million. So confident that we'll continue to reduce that at the same time as protecting services. I'm happy to answer any questions on the monitoring report itself, but if I can move on to the what still is item 9, which is the budget update report. And this has changed considerably. It was an accident of timing that the papers were published on the day of the Chancellor's budget a week and a bit ago. You might have heard something about this in the press. As is usually the case in the week or so since the budget, detail has emerged and the picture sort of worsened as detail has emerged. There are still several unknowns, the biggest of which is obviously the council's funding settlement, which we usually receive right at the end of December, last business day before Christmas, and figures will crystallise further once we've got those figures and work through them. Just to give some headlines from the Chancellor's budget and its effect on council finances, there are things in it which we would welcome. There's an additional £1.3 billion, and which includes £600 million for social care. There's a little bit of confusion about whether the £600 million is additional money or a rollover of temporary money from last year. I think the jury's set out on that, or it appears that it could well be additional money. However, it's worth noting that both the LGA and the Association of Directors of Adult Services have said that will only go part way to funding the pressures that are in adult social care alone, and that's before we look at additional, pressures on all of our services. So whilst we welcome any additional money, that isn't enough to meet increases in demand and costs. There is a return which we welcome. We've been asking for several years to multi-year settlements. It doesn't come in this year though, so we look forward to that coming in for the financial settlements from next year onwards. There is a 6% real terms increase in SEND funding. Colleagues will be aware that the pressures in SEND are far greater than 6% financially, but as I say, every little helps. And there's an additional £500 million nationally to support road maintenance, potholes if you like. This appears to be less than the previously promised additional money, which was part of the HS2 cancellation dividend that was announced by the previous government. We understand that will be, we don't know how much of that will come to us, but it'll be packaged through the East Midlands Mayor as we understand it. So we look forward to seeing exactly how they're going to distribute that down to councils on the front line like ourselves. Pleasing as it is to hear of increased funding and the opportunity for local government, it's too early to assess the impact on this council. At the time of writing the Cabinet report, we could only estimate what the increases in the national living wage would be. You'll see in Table 3, paragraph 49 of the report, the actual increase to £12.21, which is greater than I think anyone had estimated earlier on in the year, has added pressures to the council of £18.3 million for home and residential care services. Chancellor suggested that this was to be funded from additional social care grant, but we've assumed a modest estimate of £6.5 million updated in our medium-term financial strategy model. We await confirmation of the provisional local government settlement to really be able to to crystallise what that figure is going to be. The impact and the reduction of the national insurance threshold from £9,100 to £5,000 and an increase of the rate of employers' NI from 13.8 to 15% will impact on the council. We estimate these changes will be in the region of £4.5 million pressure on our finances, and again it remains to be seen if these will be funded by extra resources. We've assumed a modest level of funding below the impact, but this will be met from additional government funding. However, Cabinet should be aware that the indications are there will be insufficient extra funding for the impact on our supply chain, both of NI and of national living wage, and this generates two risks for us. A financial one, should the supply chain seek to pass on these increases to us in the form of higher charges, but also a risk of providers failing under these pressures, and we're already seeing that before these pressures emerged in the last week. It's prudently estimated, therefore, that the effect of NI changes alone on adult social care providers could range between £10 to £16 million, and that's annually. Therefore, the combined impact of the government announcements in relation to national living wage and national insurance could place an additional cost burden of around £31 million on the county council care providers in the next financial year, and the compound effects of which will need to be factored into the MTFS. MTFS currently includes an assumption of council tax increase of 2% in each year of the budget, but it doesn't include anything for an additional adult social care precept. Chancellor was not explicit in the precept for the future, but from the analysis that came following the announcement, it seems to suggest, as well as a further 1% increase in council tax, that an adult social care precept will be rolled forward. A precept together with the additional council tax referendum limit would potentially generate an additional £14.7 million next year for the council if we were to take the maximum, which we're reluctant to do. Partially, this would offset the added pressures of national insurance and national living wage, but again, we await confirmation on the referendum limits, and these decisions will all be taken along with the council tax decision at the meeting in February. We await details on how the extra £1 billion for SEND will be distributed across the sector and the impact that will have on this council's finances. It's interesting to note that for the first time, the Office of Budget Responsibility refers to the national financial challenge facing local government because of accumulated deficits that many councils are holding because of the lack of SEND funding. And whilst we don't have such a deficit, it is a particularly acute problem for many councils in the sector. Details are lacking on the extra £500 million for potholes. As we've already said, we await confirmation of this, and we await confirmation as to actually whether this really is extra cash over and above the previously announced resources that I've already mentioned. And finally, we've made assumptions in the MTFS relating to pay awards for our staff. Based on analysis of the figures announced yesterday, the 3% next year and the 2% thereafter, which have included, we believe, will be sufficient to cover the Treasury's estimates for the pay award for the MTFS period, although we note that these estimates remain below the CPI forecasts for that period. Following the Chancellor's statement last week, there's been much made of references to the proposed white paper on English local government and the possibility of reorganisation during the Parliament. Again, this is no more detail on this at the moment, and we wait with interest to see how this might unfold, ensuring that we do not lose sight of the need to continue to deliver good and effective services for our residents. Members will note that there remains considerable uncertainty in our assumptions and the implications for us from the Chancellor's statement. As and when there is greater certainty, we will update the MTFS on the progress of this through the budget setting process over the next 3 months. The local government settlement, as I said, is expected mid to late December, and it will provide us with a higher level of detail. As usual, we expect further announcements through to the budget meeting on other specific grants, public health, and detailed schools capital allocations. And finally, just an update on Table 2, which is on page 164 in the pack, and to update a number of parts of that, the headline part of which shows a gross shortfall over the 3 years of the MTFS without council tax increases of 64 million, and assuming a maximum council tax increase, which, as I've already said, we are reluctant to levy, a net shortfall over the 3 years of £16 million, and we expect with work over the next few months before we get to the budget meeting in February that those figures will reduce.
Thanks, Richard. Grateful for that detailed report, and also Nigel and your team for helping us to understand the implications of last week's budget and changes, as well as the work to bring everything in across our team of directors and senior officers in terms of managing those in-year pressures. I think it's worth highlighting the gradually improving picture in terms of that in-year spending. We go through this cycle on an annual basis. We have figures that look awful in the summer, and then by the time we get to Christmas, we're much more comfortable. We seem to be on that same cycle. I have every confidence that, as last year and the year before, we end up coming in on budget. And again, worth highlighting that not many people do. So something for us to be proud of, I think, in terms of our processes and financial management, both in year and in terms of the budget process itself. I'd like to highlight, and again, thank colleagues for what I think, from a budget setting perspective, has been an ever improving process and bit of work each year in this administration in terms of the rigour and the openness that we've had in terms of political input into budget setting, and being able to get earlier sight of more detail and understand it in more detail, and have much more of a genuine input into our priorities and our spending. That has continued to improve year on year, and I think it will do as the culture of our work continues to change and improve as well. So grateful for all of that work. I think in terms of the wider budget, it's worth highlighting, and you mentioned it there at the end, Richard, that we had a gap. We now have a bigger gap as a result of the government's announcements last week. We've done an awful lot of work over a number of years to transform services, to reduce demand or to mitigate demand, and to be as efficient, as effective as we possibly can as an authority. I think we've done, and particularly look around the country at the work of others, or not work of others in some cases, a really good job of doing that, and to some extent doing our bit in the conversation. Everybody has a gap and a shortfall, but ours is far more manageable than most, particularly when you look at some of our immediate neighbours. But this has added additional pressure, and we are going to have some of those conversations in the coming weeks to understand the impact of that, particularly that living wage impact, which, as ever in these slightly dogmatic conversations nationally, governments seem to want to laud the benefits of and ignore the impacts of, when it comes to both employers and to us as a huge employer of, particularly in things like catering services, for example, a lot of people on and around the living wage. And of course, it doesn't have just impacts on those lowest paid workers, but all the way up the food chain in terms of income and salaries as well. The number that has been set aside to allegedly cover employer NI in the public sector doesn't look anything like a big enough number to actually cover the impact of employers NI in the public sector. So it remains to be seen how much of an impact that will have. But clearly, particularly for our care providers, as has been touched on, if the cost of employing a part-time living wage member of staff is going to go up by 15, 20, 25%, that's going to put huge pressure on already under strain services. And we are yet to see, of course, the impact of things like winter fuel changes and others on the demand of those services as well. So it raises a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainty for us, that the budget announcements last week, and we hope that we will get some answers and some clarity to that, not least in the local government settlement in December. Obviously, there will be, as ever, and Conservative governments were as guilty as anybody of saying there'll be an increase in spending power on the assumption that council tax goes up as well. But it remains to be seen how much any funding announcements can mitigate the additional pressure and the additional cost that has been squarely put on local government to manage in the coming months. And there are some schemes, as we dig through that detail, things that just will not be able to progress in the way we've seen. We brought a paper to this cabinet a few weeks ago to talk about how we're going to invest in and accelerate the academisation process in schools, for example, using a grant that the government have just withdrawn. So there are all sorts of implications like that we're going to have to consider in the coming months. But I think public more broadly should be reassured in the sense that when you look at both the ongoing in-year pressures, actually we have a really strong record of pulling that in and getting in a comfortable place come the end of the financial year. That's hugely important because anything obviously that we do overspend in year adds to our longer term budget pressure and challenge. So I have no doubt we will do that again, and I have no doubt over the coming months we will manage to mitigate some of those challenges in the MTFS and make sure that once again we are in a place come February to set a balanced budget with some long-term proposals and sustainability that puts us relatively in a really strong position compared to many authorities around the country. So it hasn't been made any easier in the last week or so, subject to answers forthcoming from the government. Anyone else want to speak on this, Neil?
Thanks, Leader. I support Councillor Jackson's comments and in particular things relating to my portfolio, the transport funding that he mentioned was the HS2, etc., which appears to have some question marks over it now as to where that's going to go, and perhaps we can touch on that on the last item on the agenda as well. We need to be working with the Mayor, with the Combined Authority to try and persuade and lobby for as much of that funding as possible to help us. Councillor Jackson mentioned road repairs, etc. Then we need that additional support for all our residents and users in Nottinghamshire. The pressures on SEND are always there, and they seem to be increasing, and so we need to have that extra support. And I think that we need to have the government support in the appeal process, the panels when they're looking at SEND. There are sometimes areas where there are expensive options which are chosen when in fact there's more efficient ways of delivering that service, and in fact we want to be lobbying the government. It's not always all about money. Sometimes it's about the way a policy is delivered, and we need to lobby the government to get them to change their approach as to how those appeal or panel decisions are made on SEND transport. The living wage and with the national insurance pressures, never mind about the effect on the council, but more indirectly, if that has an impact on jobs and economic growth, which it's likely to do in the county, then it could well be there's extra pressure then on benefits, on health and well-being of employees that may possibly end up losing their jobs with the number of employees in companies having to be reduced, and so that all doesn't assist with the mental stress and the health and well-being of our residents. So there are lots of additional pressures which will come into being as a result of this, and I think the government has spent a lot of time giving wage increases to certain people at the detriment of others, and I think they need to be reviewing their approach to that.
Thank you, Neil. Bruce?
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to mention SEND. It's been mentioned twice actually by Richard and by Neil. It is one of the issues which is brought up at the County Council's network on a regular basis. What you don't recognise is that many authorities actually have to access private provision to be able to provide SEND provision for pupils. As a result, a 20% increase in private school fees by charging VAT is going to have a significant impact on many other authorities who access this private provision. We at this council have invested heavily in SEND education over the last few years, and that is to our credit, and that is keeping our the impact of the increases in this particular area of our responsibility down to an absolute minimum. And for all those people that have been involved in it, really a big pat on the back, because you've obviously looked into the crystal ball and recognised that this this new administration down in Westminster is going to go and put a 20% increase on VAT, and also make it more unaffordable for those authorities, particularly in the south. So we are not as nowhere near in bad a place as they are, on the basis of the work we've done in the past. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. One of the outstanding questions that we need clarity on imminently around that SEND funding as to whether that's something that is going to benefit us in terms of the resource available to us, or whether it's something that's just going to be used to plug the gap of other authorities who have massively overspent, to the detriment of those who have bothered to balance the books in that space over recent years. So we will see. Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So as Rich alluded to, the 600 million that was lauded by the government that put in the budget was supposed to be the saviour of social care, etc. And it's just worth noting, as Rich has said, that 600 million is going to be less than a third of what the sector needs as a result of the extra costs that the government puts as part of the budget, and that's going to have a devastating impact on social care, not only in Nottinghamshire but across the country. We've already had Nottinghamshire Care Association contact myself and officers to express their disappointment and how they feel let down and underappreciated by the government, the fact they put these extra costs in and with not the mitigation to support them. So we are doing what we can to support the Care Association. But it goes without saying, those costs for our care providers are going to look to try to, of course, pass back onto ourselves to help support them as well, which I can imagine they're going to do. So that impact is going to be felt. And what's frustrating for me is that there's obviously lots of what the NHS, which is really important, should be, because that does need funding, but we talk about 22 billion for the NHS in the budget, but less than a fraction of that for adult social care. So adult social care has been treated as a second-class service, and adult social care needs to work hand in hand with the NHS, because the impact we can have to save on the NHS if adult social care is done right and funded is can absolutely have a huge impact for the country. So really much hope the government do listen and they do put the proper funding in place for adult social care, and that they do put the funding in place for the services that we are reliant as well, such as GPs, such as carers, to make sure that they don't feel this massive double whammy that they're getting from the government. And as Richard said, we do have the current in-year overspend for adult social care. We are working hard to bring that down, but these extra measures are not helping us in the slightest. And the measures we are doing are going to have an impact this year and future years, in terms, especially around the technology strategy and the work we're doing to enable the brokerage and the voids. But to be absolutely clear, unless we get that proper funding and proper support from the government, this issue is only going to get worse, not just for ourselves, but councils across the country, as you do see. So I really do hope they listen and that they realise you have to see the demographics of this country, the way we're going with an older population. If they don't get it right now, that is just going to have a massive impact in future years, not only on local councils, but on the government. So it's hoping they do listen and they put the proper funding in place. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Absolutely right. I think the headline that I took away from the budget was that for all of the pain of significant tax rises, which government says falls on the private sector, but as we've discussed in many ways falls also on the public sector, without certainty yet as to how we're going to cover that. Actually, the money that it generates and the investment that goes into public services as a result doesn't even cover existing demand, never mind start to build any sustainability for the future. You mentioned the NHS numbers there, which for the most part will just cover the existing budget gap for the next couple of years in terms of that spending, even though that budget has gone up by 60% over the last decade. I've been really pleased, actually, not to make too partisan a point, to hear the new leader of the opposition talking about opportunities for a fundamental review of how the state works and how our services work to try and make these things sustainable for the future. I hope we can drive that conversation, because it's absolutely what needs to happen. Might have been yourself or somebody certainly said, Neil, money is an answer to some extent, but it's certainly not going to fix the long-term sustainability problem in our public services, is it? So more conversation needs having, and we, for our part, as an authority, will certainly try and drive that conversation and have our say in terms of what's needed in terms of significant reform to a number of our services, both adults and children's services in particular. Sam, you want to come in?
Thank you, Leader. And as others have said, I obviously welcome the additional £1 billion for SEND that the budget included. And I really do hope that some of that will come to Nottinghamshire to help contribute towards what we're doing. We don't have a deficit, but we're investing over £50 million into the creation of new SEND school places, nearly 500 by next year. Hopefully some of that money can help us contribute to that. But also, we don't have a deficit in our high needs block, which supports SEND children in mainstream settings, as other authorities do. But hopefully some of that funding, if allocated to Nottinghamshire, can increase the amount of support we're offering there. So I really do hope that that new money comes to those councils that have been well managed and not just write off the debt of others. And as you've said, I'm really am disappointed in the government scrapping the academisation grant. We have a pipeline in Nottinghamshire. At the last budget, we set out plans of how we're going to speed the process up and tackle that. Part of that included maybe increasing the amount of that grant that we get rather than schools to put extra resource in to speed that up. That's what the academies are asking for, the trust, that's what schools are asking for, and that's what parent and families are supporting across Nottinghamshire. We had plans in place to deliver on that. With the removal of the grant, we can no longer do it, and that's really frustrating for us, but also the families, schools and trusts that we have in our divisions. But of course, Cabinet need to be aware, as Richard will be well aware of, the commitment of this council, or the requirement of this council, to continue with the processing of academisation will continue. We just won't have the funding from the government to do it, so we're going to have to find that somewhere, which, as you've said, is another pressure government have just put on local authorities. Really frustrating. Just end on a positive though, and I can see no other reason why the government have recommitted to the school rebuilding programme other than the fact that we, leader, wrote a letter to the Chancellor a few months ago asking for it. So it's all down to us that they've recommitted to that. There are 10 schools on our list that need rebuilding. We're waiting for confirmation on whether those 10 will be done, or whether they're going to go out and survey and come back with a new list, but really do welcome that funding, and that will help our budget pressures as well, because once they're rebuilt, the maintenance cost of those schools can be reinvested into other schools across the county, so that's a positive.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, it was good to see headline figures in terms of school rebuilding and also transport projects and funding. What we haven't yet got is the list that says whether ours are on them or not. So both in terms of those school rebuilds and speaking purely local premise, in the sense that 3 of those school rebuilds are in Mansfield. I'm very keen to see them happen. I want to see the list that says they're still on there. Equally, we've spoken at length prior to this meeting about the A614 and the need for certainty around the funding. £28 million worth of funding for that project. It cannot go ahead without that funding. And whilst I've seen a headline that says 650 million quid for transport projects, I'm yet to see a list that tells us what those projects are. So it's absolutely vital that we get that detail as quickly as possible. We have written to government in both of those regards to say, give us this certainty. I hope that will be forthcoming. Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I think obviously for the thousands who are listening to this live broadcast, they will have picked up on the uncertainty in terms of projecting future budgetary figures. Medium-term financial strategy requirement to set 3 years worth of future budgets when we have little or no control over the amount of money that we are going to receive. We won't even know until late December what our budget allocation is going to be for the next financial year. So we start off a whole budget setting process very much in the dark, and obviously without some clarity as to some of the announcements that were made in the Chancellor's budget last week. But the bit that which brings me on to how successful effectively the finance department are in terms of managing, controlling expenditure in a budget that we have already set, and that to me is the bit that I want to focus on. We set a budget for this financial year. Richard's already given the figure that will come out in the unpublished period 6 accounts, which will show a £2.1 million overspend. I think a £2.1 million overspend in the context of a budget of 660 million. So we're talking about a 0.3% variance effectively at this stage of the financial year. And this is in an organisation that provides hundreds of services, employs thousands of people, has to respond to immediate demand, a demand that we may not know about until literally hours or minutes before it actually happens. So the fact that Nigel and his team, and obviously the cabinet member I have to include in that, are able to keep control of and manage the fact that we can come in with those figures at this stage of the financial year, It's beyond me how you manage it. I have to say, when we're at the starting point we are now for the next financial year, and yet at this stage, halfway through the current financial year, we are so on track. So my grateful thanks to all those in your department, Nigel, yourself obviously, and to the Cabinet Member and Deputy for their admirable stewarding of the process. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks,
You'll
Chris.
be able to get out the door.
Anyone else want to speak to this item? Nobody can say anything else nice about anybody.
Poor old Nigel.
Great. All right, then we'll move then to recommendations. So, Richard, do you want to come back in?
Just to sum up, I agree with all of Colin's comments, especially the Chief Whip's comments. I think I'm not going to go over what Colin said. I think fundamentally it comes down to the fact that we were in a very good financial position. The budget, for political reasons, has put £31 million net of additional burdens on this council, and I don't think it's unreasonable to be asking the government to fund us for the vast majority of the additional burdens that they've put on to us. We've had a good record actually as a council across party of lobbying governments, whether we've been in government, our party's been in government, or other parties have been in government. We've usually lobbied regardless of that, and you indeed with your previous role, leader, did exactly that, and with some success as well, not just for us but for the whole local government sector last year. And so I just look forward to support of opposition parties, in particular of our new two county councillors who are also members of Parliament, in banging the drum for us in Westminster to deliver extra funding to fund the burdens put onto us by the council. It's not fair, and it's not particularly honest of government to simply shift the burden onto local taxation, which comes out of people's already taxed incomes, to pay for their own political priorities. So we'll be upping the game on that lobby over the coming months.
Absolutely, and it's very important to point out that I did go down there and come back with £500 million in January last year for local government. So I've passed that challenge and burden on to councillors Payne and Welsh. We'll see how they get on. Right, take us to the recommendations then. Both of these items are to note effectively, but financial monitoring report recommendations on page 154. All those in favour of those? Thank you. And the budget update on page 170. All those in favour? Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to fly through this final item, East Midlands Combined Authority priorities. You'll see in the appendix, the very last page of your pack, there is a précis of our asks, in inverted commas, to the Combined Authority. We've spoken already about, in the context of the development company, the opportunity for us to feed in and draw out key priorities, funding and investment that we want to see from a council perspective from the Combined Authority, and reiterate what we've been saying for a long time now in the development of that authority, that it is not and cannot be a thing that is over there doing stuff to us, but something that we are part of and that we help to describe and direct the priorities of that organisation to support our goals. This document very briefly lays out some of the headlines of what some of those goals are and some of the priorities that we have fed in to that process. As the place director often says, we will lean into the Combined Authority and support them to recognise that our priorities are the most important priorities of everybody's in this space. So just to cover very briefly a couple of headlines, obviously major transport powers, and we hope, although again yet to be confirmed by the new government, very significant transport funding coming through the Combined Authority. We want to see significant investment in our highways schemes, both in terms of major projects and also highways maintenance, investment, improvement in our bus infrastructure, particularly the integration of services and ticketing. Mentioned in there of our energy priorities, and particularly major projects like Step Fusion, which is the region's single biggest public investment in terms of a growth project and an opportunity for us that needs to come with significant planning and infrastructure and skills wrapped around it. We're well placed, at least in part because of the work of the DevCo and the partnership over recent years in developing those proposals to be able to do and deliver that, but we need wider support for that. And you see as you go down that document, significant opportunities around the economy of growth and housing planning skills in particular. But as I've always argued, regardless of the direct powers of the combined authority, there is an opportunity to get our heads together across the local government family, across the region, to tackle pretty much anything we want to try and tackle, not least some of our wider council priorities in terms of health and prevention in communities and other areas we'd like to invest in. So that's laid out in brief, rather than as make demands of the combined authority in letters and documents. We are spending a lot of time and energy lobbying and discussing and persuading in those forums, and we'll continue to do that, make sure we drive the best outcomes that we can. Neil.
Yeah, thanks, leader. Yeah, you mentioned one of the words persuasion, and I think another one is collaboration as well, as you highlighted on this appendix. I think what's important is that we do work with the Mayor of the Combined Authority closely, and we increase our persuading powers and we increase our collaboration to ensure that we do get the best for Nottinghamshire. And you've highlighted some of the items in the appendix. The local transport plan is very important. That investment in our major roads. It's not the 614, but there's also then the Mansfield A60 improvements. I noticed it says A606 here. It should be A60. And the dualling improvements of the A46 around Newark. But then, apart from those projects, it's about the investment in our local highways to contribute to the repairs and maintenance of our highways as well. It's important that we keep our bus network being upgraded, and it's the integration of that which is the important aspect, so that it's going across the two county areas rather than just within one county area. And you mentioned environment, but it's important that we do contribute to not just the energy aspects of it, but then also it mentions the flood alleviation. It talks about the electric vehicle infrastructure, and that's all about working together, not just within the county areas and with the mayor, but then also with the district authorities as well. And it's about getting the new or more efficient fuel, etc., for our buses and indeed our other council vehicles as well. Talk about the waste, and then finally on the housing and planning about the retrofitting of housing schemes. That's again working together with the district councils to ensure that the best possible energy reduction and energy use of new developments and indeed even existing developments actually takes place. So there's a lot in there. There's a lot of comprehensive stuff which we need to be persuading the mayor on, and the best way of doing that will be to work with the mayor and to collaborate to use our excellent persuasive powers, not just politicians, but I know a lot of senior officers have been using their extremely excellent persuasive powers as well, and we need to make sure that we can get that investment for the future.
Absolutely, thanks, Neil. Keith.
Yeah, thank you, leader. I think it's obvious that we've got to work closely with MCA and not just stand there demanding this is what we want. But what worries me at the moment is the speed in which things are being done. And there's a few reasons for that. So, my team worked extremely hard on putting the scheme for the 614 together. And it was ready to start, and the shovel in the ground. The only thing we didn't have was actually the money. Well, now that's been delayed, and while they re-evaluate it, well, we all know that re-evaluation costs money. So it's going to significantly add to the costs of this project, which may then put the scheme out because it won't meet the business case. So there's things like that are really worrying. And also, there's a big development, the housing development, waiting to get on with it and they've been waiting patiently for us to make a decision that it's going to happen. So it's having a wider impact on just being the road. So there's things like that that concern me a lot, and I think we need to see how we can maybe push things along a bit better. And if you look at the sort of the economy and growth side of it, so our business support that we're really good at. You know, we've got a good team working around Nottinghamshire, really supporting businesses that need that support, keeping them viable, actually helping them expand. Well, those contracts run out in March. Yeah, and I know what I'd be doing if I was on that contract. I'd be looking for another job because I'd want to have to pay. I've got to pay my bills, and I'm worried that we'll lose some talent if they don't get on with it, or at least say that right, we'll keep the status quo going for another 6 months whilst we work on the plan. But at the moment, there's a cliff edge that's going to drop off if they don't sort it out. So I think yes, we've got to work with them, and yes, we've got to be nice, but actually we need to push as well because they are gonna cost us money. Cost us money, and we're going to lose decent staff, and we're going to end up with the ones that won't leave because that's the only job they could possibly bloody get. So, it's about talent and keeping the talent. And I'm sorry that might be derogatory to some people that work in those positions, but that's the reality as well. So there's a lot on here that comes within my portfolio that I'm really frustrated about, and anybody that works within my portfolio knows that I don't like hanging around and waiting for things to happen, and I feel we've stopped, and that's a shame because we had a really good momentum going, and the mayor has an opportunity actually to say, look, let's keep it going as it is whilst I sort out what I want, and whilst we sort out what we want in the future, not stop and then fall off the cliff and go, oh, we haven't got the people to do what we want now. So that's my only frustration, but I really support this report. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. And it's a fair point. I think that obviously a big part of our work in terms of supporting this transition to a new way of doing things is helping them and also holding feet to the fire in terms of developing that resource and that capacity and the skill set within MQ itself to do these things and deliver these things. Those who've been involved in the meetings in recent months will know there's been a lot of conversation about the need not just to wait 12 months until full strategies have been developed and planned, but actually to start to invest and deliver things now, not least because residents will want to see the benefit and impact of that. So it's an ongoing conversation. Those who follow politics will know that not everything that will happen in MQ within the coming weeks will be what I specifically wanted or planned for it to be. But actually, we've incumbent on all of us being involved in that project to try and make sure that it is as close to what we as an organisation would want and want to see delivered as possible. I think in the example that you gave around the 614, we've seen the impact of a change in national government and the delays and the costs that brings, the uncertainty that brings. I hope that in the future, once we have made this transition into a more regional and long-term decision-making where the politics changes gradually and regularly rather than the cliff edge of a general election, that actually in the future, if you get those things passed down and decided here, we won't get those cliff edges because we'll all have been involved in the long-term planning and strategy for projects like that. That's certainly the idea. Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I really welcome the priority on housing and planning because we know how important it is in our neck of the woods, like social care, to make sure homes are built the right way because we have a huge backlog of people who would like to stay in their own homes but can't because the adaptations that haven't been done to houses or can't be because of the cost and the waiting list. So if we build houses correctly, so where people can get through doorways if they've got a physical disability, where if they've got vision impairment, they can get around their home safely, where they can actually put in a stair lift if required, as opposed to the houses we're getting built now. That will not only have a massive impact financially for us, but also means people can actually stay in their home for longer, which is what I think we'd all like to do, and what I know from speaking to a lot of people we care for and from the carers, and that is what people are asking for. So really glad that we're going to take this priority forwards to push that there, and also the priorities we've got about growing the health and care workforce to combat staff shortages, because we do have that issue, and obviously the huge cost it puts on us in terms of agencies to have to fill that. So we do some great work around the apprenticeships that we do and trying to grow our own, but any help that we can get from could support that and all available parties, because it's really important that we do have that workforce in place, not only financially, but it's that stability that people are being cared for, to know that the care is going to be on a day-to-day basis can have a real impact on them. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's right. And it's a choice for MCO as an organisation, for the mayor and decision makers to make, isn't it, as to whether you sit back and say, well, this is a body that does transport and skills and infrastructure, and therefore care is not our thing, or whether actually, as I said in the kind of proceeds of all this, that actually if you collectively want to lean in and deliver change and impact on things, you can do pretty much anything. And care is one of those examples that cuts across skills and housing and all of those elements that are very much functions of MCare. We need to make sure part of this conversation about our priorities is making sure that it does delve into those things and those more complex elements of our wider public services. Those powers of persuasion, Neil, to make sure that works. So we'll submit those priorities and continue to have those conversations, and hopefully, as I said, the capacity and structure, the plans come together, recruitment comes together within MCure as well. Over the course of this autumn, we'll be in a strong position to drive some of those priorities out the other end. Is there anyone else who wants to speak to this? Bruce, on.
Thank you very much. I give a word of warning. It will not be long before the electorate out there start to ask the question, has the mayoral authority made a difference to my life? And I make that warning because at this present point of time, the answer would be definitely no, it hasn't. And it's extremely important that that happens. Otherwise, there will be consequences to that situation. That's the first point. The second point I have to make as a board member, I make the point that our members are far better briefed going into meetings than any other of the three main authorities. And so it's really a thank you really for the team for the work that they're putting in to ensure that the relevant groundwork is done, and that they make sure that we have the correct information to make decisions on behalf of the residents that we represent. So this is the second thank you I've said. I've thanked Viv, and I'm also thanking the team, obviously led by the Chief Executive and Derek, because we are far better briefed, I can assure you, than the other authorities, and that gives us an opportunity really to make sure that our residents are well represented. So thank you.
I've never seen you so jolly and generous.
I know. Normally I'm
praising everybody. It's incredible.
telling people off, but there we go.
Neil, you want to come back in?
Yeah, just wanted to pick up on Bruce's points about the electorate and what's the MCA doing, etc. And that's why I was talking about collaboration, because what we don't want to happen is that we end up just having conflict and politicians arguing and us arguing with the mayor, because the electorates would just say, oh, here we go again, politicians just arguing amongst yourselves, blah, blah, blah. What are you actually doing about getting things done for us and improving things? So that's why we've got to have that collaboration and to work together so that we are seen to be achieving things, and that the mayor, we want to help the mayor achieve things rather than just being seen to be politicians bickering with each other.
Absolutely. Nottinghamshire is and should continue to be collaborator in chief, I think, when it comes to trying to drive that cohesion and those outcomes out of the combined authority. If that's it from everybody, then we'll move to recommendations on page 177, which is effectively to endorse the brief list of priorities here for us to continue to work with and to lobby MCare. All those in favour of those recommendations, thank you very much. That brings us to the end.
And a big thank you to Ben from all of us.
Well, bless you. It's an absolute pleasure to chair cabinet meetings for many years. Well, I'm still around for a few weeks yet. I'm not dead, so I shall continue to do all of that until December. Thank you.